Over the past decade or so, we've seen the rise of the indie gaming industry, as well as the subsequent emulation from AAA developers. The draw to these games often lies in the fact that these smaller development teams lack the financial backing of a traditional publisher. This allows for complete creative control over what they make, and the games are able to incorporate narrative themes and gameplay mechanics that the risk-averse publishers aren't willing to tackle. As the industry continues to grow, we see more and more indie titles hitting storefronts each year, including popular titles such as Papers, Please, Super Meat Boy, and retro throwbacks like Shovel Knight. But with the ever-increasing growth, we have many more games than we'd be reasonably able to keep track of. Luckily, there are always a handful of games that will be thrust into the mainstream spotlight, gaining coverage from prominent YouTubers and Twitch streamers, allowing the game to reach critical success. The focus of today's video happens to be just such a game known as Undertale. Developed by Toby Fox and released on the PC in 2015, Undertale follows a fairly simple plot, with the opening sequence explaining the events that take place before the start of the game. Essentially, humans and monsters both coexisted before eventually going to war, the result of which sees the monsters being banished to the underground, sealed behind a magical barrier. The game begins after you take the role of a human child that has recently fallen into the underground. With seemingly no means of leaving the way you came in, you must march forward into the ruins and through all of the underground in order to reach the magical barrier and escape. All along the way you will meet many interesting characters that may or may not want to kill you for their own various reasons. Undertale uses a top-down isometric perspective, much like many of the RPG games of the NES and SNES era. The random encounters act in much the same way, where the player's perspective is shifted to focus on monsters you'll be facing off against. Where gameplay begins to diverge from what we expect from a traditional RPG is within your very first battle. You should immediately notice that the enemy's churn incorporates a pseudo bullet hell shooter within the bottom half of the screen. You are represented by a pixel heart that can usually move in 8 directions, all the while the enemy is sending projectiles your way. The next thing that you should notice is that the battle system acts more like a conflict system, as the game actively encourages you to end a fight through conversation or other non-combative means. Undertale is also a very narrative-driven game, and much of the charm comes from experiencing it for the first time. As such, I'll refrain from discussing the plot to avoid spoilers, and even though this game has come out some time ago, there's a slim possibility that there are a handful of people out there that are still blind to this game's inner workings. Green Flash Brewing out of San Diego, California is home to many popular beers that are the embodiment of the West Coast style. But aside from keeping with traditions and conventions, they are more than willing to break from them. One of their more interesting beers from their flagship lineup is Le Freak, a fusion of a Belgian-style triple with an American Imperial IPA. Le Freak is a fairly big beer sitting at 9.2% ABV and 101 IBUs. And other than being available on draft, Le Freak is made available on store shelves in 22-ounce bottles. Pouring this beer is a visual treat, as the hazy golden-orange color gives rise to a fluffy off-white head that will often leave a beautiful lacing on your glass. The head can grow considerably and is not unlike seafoam, which is fitting considering the nature of the brewery's name. The nose on Le Freak is a complex mixture of fruitiness of yeast, zestiness of orange citrus, and a myriad of other fruity aromas. Deep below, hints of the spice that is telling of a triple peek through, but the hoppiness of the IPA half is seemingly absent. The first few sips of Le Freak bring the triple portion of the beer to the front, with the sweet and earthy flavors. The fruity aromas we smelled before turn into a delight for the tongue within the first few seconds of sipping, before eventually giving way to the sweetness of the malts. The beer continues as the spices make their presence known, but quickly turns to the bitter of the hops. Le Freak has a medium body. You can definitely tell it's there when you're sipping it, but it isn't heavy like some of the stickier Imperials or triple IPAs. The carbonation levels are a little higher than I expected, but they're a nice touch and couple well with the dry finish. Neither Undertale nor Le Freak are something that you'd expect at first. Straying a bit outside of convention, the two are a mashup of multiple genres and styles, and while this isn't anything new, they're both executed very well. The turn-based combat is something that is very familiar to anybody who is a veteran of the older turn-based RPGs, and as such, this traditional gameplay is complemented by the smooth and spicy flavors that the Belgian triple half of L'Afrique has to offer. Each thought out and calculated churn of combat is echoed by the smooth and complex flavors that are waiting to be dissected by the tongue. When each churn inevitably gives way to the faster paced bullet hell, the IPA half of L'Afrique is there to pick up the remainder of the experience, its hot punch punctuating every hit you take, and the bitterness adding to the frantic dance between your pixelated heart and the plethora of objects converging on it. Moving over to visuals, Undertale hits the player with a black void before ushering them into the ruins of the underground, which then take on some lighter, almost pastel colors. L'Afrique's pale haze offers a complement to the pastel foregrounds as well as a strong contrast to the dark backgrounds found throughout the underground, and this ends up creating a sort of thematic through line between the two. Speaking of themes, one of the main ones in Undertale is determination. Many of the character arcs revolve around determination in some way, which often takes them from seemingly one-dimensional characters to deeper and more complex ones. The more you progress the story, the more we're treated to who these individuals are and what they stand for. L'Afrique contrasts this aspect of Undertale as the complex flavors of the triple are the first to hit your tongue, only to give way to the harsh determined hot bite of the IPA. It's as though you are taking the story of Undertale and experiencing it backwards. The complexity of L'Afrique is also a complement to the world that Undertale takes place in. Throughout your time in the underground, many of the people and places you have visited before will have changed to reflect your actions. Further complementing its complexity is the various paths you can take through the game, resulting in many different outcomes and endings. Undertale is a unique game, offering veterans a different take on how to approach conflict, not by introducing deep and varied combat, but by showing that non-violent action is viable in survival within the game's world. Other games like Mass Effect and Fallout have attempted this as well, but it isn't as integral to the core gameplay like it is in Undertale. The only downside is that it seems a bit ham-fisted at times, even going so far as to criticize players playing it like they would a traditional RPG, though I'm pretty sure that is the whole point. Undertale is also very narrative focused, and this may turn off more action-oriented players, even if the encounters in the game are all unique and varied. This is compounded by the fact that the good portion of gameplay is dedicated to world building, even the enemy encounters. If you're someone that appreciates a good narrative and complex characters, then I urge you to give Undertale a try. The game is pretty short, which is one of its strengths, so it isn't that big of an investment of time. Overall, I'd say that Undertale sits in the Let's Play category. Even though it offers some replayability through multiple endings and paths, the game's strengths really come from experiencing it for the first time. As for L'Afrique, it's a beer that I've come to enjoy very much. While it doesn't offer the best qualities of either style it takes from, it comes together to offer a unique experience that can be refreshing for many different people. The high ABV can be a bit of a turn-off, especially considering that it's only available in 22-ounce bombers, so this may be a beer that you need to share. L'Afrique also isn't as imposing as some of its IPA counterparts, so newcomers may be able to enjoy it, even if only in smaller quantities. The price point may be a deciding factor as to whether or not you should buy this beer, as many of Green Flash's beers tend to be on the pricier side. For L'Afrique, I'd have to rate it in the I'll have another category, though at the price it goes for, I tend to pick this one up less often. Strictly adhering to a single genre or style can make a game or beer that is the best of its class an overall great experience, but there are those out there that are willing to break the boundaries of tradition in order to create a new and worthwhile experience.